Gracious God, may we remember this day both Martha's diligence and Mary's devotion. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. One of the things Libby and I love to do, well, maybe I do more than Libby, I don't know. She's sitting over there. One of the things Libby and I love to do is entertain in our home, providing for others a relaxed time, hopefully with wonderful food, drink, and great company. We hope to make our home a haven of hospitality. And so we clean and tidy up the house, we set a nice table, the appetizers and drinks are ready when guests arrive, and the main meal, the dessert, are prepared and ready to be served in a relatively timely manner. And then, of course, there is the ambiance. We usually light some candles and have soft music playing in the background. And the animals, well, we ensure they are on their best behavior. Usually the chief cook, me, is busy in the kitchen, while my sous chef, Libby, greets the guests, makes sure they're comfortable, and she begins conversing with them in her charming British accent. Now, if any of you entertain, you know some of this drill and how much effort goes into planning such an event. So let's look at the gospel in a fresh way if we reflect upon our own entertaining experiences. So I'm going to fill in some of the gaps about Martha and Mary that are found in other gospels, and we have the story from Luke today. So the Martha in our gospel today is not just some random woman Jesus drops in to visit. From other gospel accounts, we know that Martha, the homeowner, and her two younger siblings, Mary and Lazarus, live in Bethany, which is about 3 miles from Jerusalem. We believe they grew up with Jesus in Nazareth, and therefore they are all longtime beloved friends, and these maybe are Jesus' best friends in the world. So now, no doubt, Jesus got word to these three that he was stopping by and bringing with him 12 of his friends. Wow. While they were excited to see him, you can imagine the hustle and bustle of activity that ensued, especially for Martha, the eldest, and for Mary, who no doubt was given her marching orders. At that time, the responsibility fell on the women to make the home presentable, prepare all the food, procure the wine, stand and greet the men at the door, with clean water and linens to wash their dusty, dirty feet, which we heard from the Old Testament. This was an expected gesture of hospitality. And they had to do all of this before the men sat down to converse with each other while the women served them. And that's pretty much all women were allowed to do in Jesus' day. It was rare for women to sit and eat with men they didn't know, like the disciples. And unless the men had finished eating and drinking their fill, then maybe the men would invite them to join them. So you can now imagine Martha's frustration, not only that she was left to do everything alone, but that her sister, countercultural Mary, was with the men, listening to Jesus, evidently by his invitation, which irritated Martha. I really feel for Martha. I believe she has been given a bad rap over the years, okay? You see, she had no choice but to do what was always expected of her. Her opportunities and privileges as a woman were severely limited. Now, of course, then, she was worried and distracted. She wanted to get everything right for Jesus. Mary's devotion to Jesus, yes, is certainly touching and commendable, but so was Martha's diligence in doing what was needed and right to be done, given who she was in her time and culture. And so here is the so what moment, as Terry says. Both Martha and Mary are role models of what God calls us to do in our spiritual lives. And I'm not just speaking to women here, but to all of you men as well. There are times when all of us feel like Martha, like we have no choice but to do what is expected of us. When our opportunities and privileges are severely limited, maybe for who we are due to prejudice. And when worry and distraction set in, of course they do, because people in general tend to pressure us to get it right, most, if not all, the time. And so let me return to the so what moment. Martha and Mary are role models for all of us in emulating what God calls us to do in our spiritual lives, which is to strive the best we can to achieve a healthy spiritual balance, a balance between our being and our doing. For to go deeper into our spiritual lives, it does require being, taking the time to be still, listen, pray, engage in solitude, reflection, sacred reading, or any other spiritual disciplines that help us to grow and be open to God's guiding voice. And to go deeper into our spiritual lives also requires doing, engaging in actions which serve others, feeding the hungry, helping the homeless, advocating for justice for those who are oppressed, advocating for those whose human rights are being violated. And then there are daily acts of kindness, welcoming the stranger in our midst, comforting a friend who is grieving, finding some small way to be Christ's heart and hands and feet in our world where we may see a need that needs to be met. So today, we're very fortunate. Today we happen to celebrate the feast day of 4 women in history who emulated ministries of being and doing. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Amelia Bloomer, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman. Today is their exact feast day. Let me tell you a little bit about these women. These 4 lived in the 1800s and died before women had the right to vote. 2 of them, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Amelia Jenks Bloomer, were white, and so had some advantages due to their skin color. 2 of them, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, were black and had no advantages, both enduring the horrors of slavery. But their common denominator as women severely limited their opportunities and privileges. Society's strict laws and Victorian expectations that God ordained them to only be wives and mothers left them very little choices, very little freedom about the trajectories of their lives. But all of them were fiercely religious, and it was because of their strong faith and their willingness to listen to God's call that they became empowered to become prophets and liberators. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and these are just snippets, folks, read about these folks. Elizabeth Cady Stanton dedicated her life to righting the wrongs perpetuated against women by church and society. And she persistently called church and society on their denying women equal access to professional jobs, denying women property ownership, denying women the vote, and granting less pay to women for the same work as men. Amelia Bloomer joined in the temperance, anti-slavery, and women's rights movements. And this is, I love this about her. She made dress reform as a platform for justice by publicly wearing loose-fitting Turkish trousers out in public. And the male clergy at the time were aghast, and they vilified her often from the pulpit. Sojourner Truth was a slave until she was 29, but fled slavery with the help of Quaker friends. And she was this really tall, imposing woman. She was like 6 feet tall. And so she became a traveling preacher. She went to white religious meetings and campgrounds, and she asked to speak. And the people were fascinated by her charismatic presence, her wit and wisdom, and no doubt her tall stature. And so they really found her hard to refuse. And so her reputation grew, and she became part of the abolitionist and women's rights speakers network, which traveled around the country. And Harriet Tubman escaped slavery at age 24 and went to Canada. And she received some pretty brutal treatment. She was disabled pretty much because of the beatings that she received as a slave. But at age 24, she went to Canada, but she could not forget her parents and other slaves behind. And so she made at least 19 trips back to Maryland between 1851 and 1861, helping to free over 300 people by leading them to Canada. That's the Underground Railroad. And she helped to free so many others, 700, 1,000 other slaves during the Civil War era. So these 4 women persevered and found ways of being and doing in a male-dominated world, which paved the way for women's rights, rights that we now have. And so we stand on their shoulders. My friends, Martha and Mary's story reveals this healthy spiritual balance of being and doing, a balance that does bring forth much good fruit from us. And while, yes, this balance isn't always easy, we all get distracted by life's worries and demands, Jesus invites us to choose this dynamic duo, which is the better part of the spiritual life, being and doing, to empower us to become more devoted to God and more committed and effective in our serving, just like Martha and just like Mary. Amen.